Part 1. The galaxy was quiet, too quiet. The stars still burned brightly in the endless void, but there was an eerie stillness that hung over everything. For decades, the Zarnok Dominion had swept through the cosmos like a storm, leaving destruction and despair in their wake. Their ships were massive, their weapons devastating, and their cruelty unmatched. No one could stand against them. One by one, civilizations fell, their planets scorched, their people enslaved or wiped out entirely. The United Galactic Alliance, once a beacon of hope and unity among the stars, now lay in ruins. Its fleets were shattered, its leaders scattered, and its spirit broken. Captain Liam Carter stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen ahead. The ship was old, its hull patched together with whatever scraps they could scavenge from other vessels. It wasn't much to look at, but it was all they had left. Around him, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, though their faces betrayed the weight of what they carried. They were tired, exhausted, really, but none of them dared to say it aloud. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in their lungs and fight in their hearts. Liam let out a slow breath, his hands resting lightly on the railing in front of him. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and weathered, with deep lines etched into his face that spoke of years spent staring down impossible odds. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and his hazel eyes held a mix of determination and sorrow. He had seen too many battles, too many losses. Each defeat weighed heavier than the last, but he refused to give up. Not while there was even the smallest chance of turning things around. "Captain," a voice called softly behind him. It was Lieutenant Harper, a young woman with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. She held a datapad in her hand, her expression grim. "We've received word from the outer colonies. The Zarnok have taken Epsilon for..." Liam closed his eyes for a moment, letting the news sink in. Epsilon 4 had been one of the last strongholds of the UGAA, planet rich in resources and strategically vital. Its fall meant the Zarnok were closing in, tightening their grip on the galaxy. There would be no safe havens left soon, no place to regroup or rebuild. The end was drawing nearer, with each passing day. "Casualties?" Liam asked, his voice steady, despite the knot forming in his stomach. Harper hesitated before answering. "Hi, sir. Most of the population didn't make it off-world in time. Those who did, well, you know what happens to prisoners." Liam nodded slowly. He did know. The Zarnok weren't interested in mercy or negotiation. To them, any species that couldn't match their strength deserved nothing but annihilation. It was a brutal philosophy, but it worked. They had crushed every opponent they faced, and now they were coming for what little remained of the UGA. "What about reinforcements?" Liam asked, though he already suspected the answer. Harper shook her head. "Nothing substantial. A few stragglers here and there, but nothing that can turn the tide. We're on our own, Captain." Liam turned back to the viewscreen, his jaw tightening. On the screen was a map of nearby star systems, marked with red dots indicating Zarna-controlled territories. The dots were everywhere, spreading like a disease across the galaxy. The Odyssey was just one ship, a tiny speck in the vastness of space. What difference could they possibly make? But giving up wasn't an option, not yet. Not while there were still lives depending on him. If nothing else, he owed it to the people under his command to keep fighting until the very end. "Lieutenant," Liam said after a long pause, "set a course for Delta Sector. We'll rendezvous with Commander Alvarez and see if we can salvage anything from Epsilon 4. Harper raised an eyebrow. "Sir, Delta Sector is crawling with Zarnok patrols. Even if we manage to get past them, there's no guarantee we'll find anything useful." "I know," Liam replied, his tone firm. "But sitting here waiting for the inevitable isn't going to help anyone. If there's even a chance we can disrupt their operations or gather intel, we have to take it." Harper hesitated, then nodded. "Aye, sir. I'll inform the crew." As she walked away, Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the railing. The truth was, he didn't expect this mission to change anything. The Zarnok were too powerful, too organized. But sometimes, even the smallest act of defiance mattered. It reminded everyone, himself included, that they weren't just victims. They were survivors. And as long as they kept breathing, there was always hope. The Odyssey shuddered slightly as it entered hyperspace, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light. Liam watched silently, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Delta Sector was dangerous territory, but it was also close to the Zarnok supply lines. If they timed their approach carefully, they might be able to slip in unnoticed. Maybe they could destroy a shipment of weapons, or sabotage a communications relay. Anything to slow the enemy down, even if only for a little while. Behind him, the crew worked quietly, their movements precise and focused. Despite the odds stacked against them, they hadn't lost their discipline. That was something, at least. These men and women had chosen to stay with him when so many others had fled or surrendered. They believed in him, trusted him to lead them through this nightmare. He couldn't let them down. Hours passed as the Odyssey hurtled through space, closing in on its destination. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, the scene before them was grim. Wreckage floated in every direction, pieces of ships, debris from destroyed stations, and the occasional drifting body clad in a tattered uniform. It was a graveyard, a testament to the cost of resisting the Zarnok. Scanners show multiple contacts approaching, Harper reported, her voice tense. Looks like a patrol group. Liam frowned. This was exactly what he had feared. The Zarnok never left their conquered territories unguarded. Still, they had come prepared. The Odyssey's cloaking device was outdated and unreliable, but it might buy them enough time to slip past undetected. Engage the cloak, Liam ordered, and keep us on a low-powered profile. Let's see if we can sneak through without drawing attention. The ship vibrated slightly as the cloaking field activated, enveloping them in a shimmering haze. For a moment, Liam allowed himself to hope that they might actually pull this off. Then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the ship. Incoming transmission, Harper shouted. They've detected us. Liam cursed under his breath. Of course they had. Nothing ever went according to plan anymore. Evasive maneuvers. Divert all available power to the engines and shields. The Odyssey lurched violently as it banked hard to starboard, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire from the pursuing Zarnok cruisers. The crew scrambled to their stations, their earlier calm replaced by frantic urgency. Shields are holding for now, Harper said, her fingers flying over the console, but we can't keep this up forever. Liam gripped the railing tightly, his mind racing. They needed a way out, and fast. Spotting a narrow asteroid field on the scanners, he made a split-second decision. Plot a course through the asteroids, he commanded. Full throttle. Are you sure about this, sir? Harper asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. That field is dense. We'll be cutting it close. We don't have a choice, Liam replied. If we don't lose them, now, we're dead anyway. With a nod, Harper relayed the order to the helm. The Odyssey surged forward, weaving between jagged rocks and dodging bursts of enemy fire. The ship groaned in protest, its aging frame pushed to the limit. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, and several crew members stumbled as artificial gravity fluctuated. But somehow, against all odds, they made it. The Zarnok cruisers hesitated at the edge of the asteroid field, unwilling to risk following them into such treacherous terrain. As the Odyssey emerged on the other side, battered, but intact, Liam allowed himself a brief moment of relief. Good work, everyone, he said, addressing the crew. Now let's finish what we came here to do. Though the immediate danger had passed, Liam knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The Zarnok wouldn't stop hunting them, and sooner or later, their luck would run out. But for now, they had survived another day. And in a war where defeat seemed certain, survival was Victory enough. Part 2. Back on Earth, the news of the UGA's collapse reached the fledgling Human Federation like a shockwave. The Federation was still young, barely a decade old, and had only recently begun exploring beyond its own solar system. Humanity had always been cautious about stepping into the galactic stage, wary of the dangers that lurked in the vastness of space. But now, those dangers were knocking at their door. The Zarnok Dominion's relentless advance had left no corner of the galaxy untouched, and Earth's leaders knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy turned their gaze toward humanity's home. President Grace Monroe stood behind her desk in the Oval Office, her expression grim as she reviewed the latest reports from the outer colonies. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the city outside muffled by thick curtains. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that rarely missed a detail. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a tight bun, giving her an air of authority that few dared to challenge. But even she couldn't hide the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. "Madam President," said General Caleb Hayes, standing at attention near the window. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that betrayed his frustration. "We can't afford to wait any longer. If we don't act now, the Zarnok will be on our doorstep within months." Hayes was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and muscular, with a face lined by years of service. His dark skin bore the faint scars of battles fought long ago, and his deep brown eyes carried the intensity of a man who had seen too much and refused to back down. He had spent most of his career fighting wars on Earth, but this was different. This wasn't just about one nation or ideology, it was about survival. The survival of humanity itself. Monroe sighed, leaning back in her chair. "General, I understand your urgency, but you're asking me to commit resources we may not have. Our fleet is small, our technology outdated compared to what the Zarnok are using. Even if we mobilize every ship and soldier, it might not be enough." "It won't be enough if we play by their rules," Hayes replied firmly. "That's why we need to change the game entirely." The president raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "Explain." Hayes stepped forward, placing both hands on the edge of her desk. "The Zarnok rely on brute force and overwhelming numbers. They expect us to fight them head-on, to meet them in open space, and trade blows until we're wiped out. But we can't win that way. Instead, we hit them where? Their weakest supply lines, communication networks, isolated outposts. We use speed, stealth, and unconventional tactics to wear them down, make them bleed for every inch they take." Monroe studied him carefully, weighing his words. It was a risky strategy, one that went against traditional military doctrine, but desperation bred innovation, and humanity was nothing if not adaptable. Still, she needed more than just bold ideas. She needed proof that this could work. And who would lead such an operation? She asked finally. Hayes didn't hesitate. "Me. I've spent my life studying warfare, Madam President. I know how to turn weaknesses into strengths. Give me command of the fleet, and I'll show you what humanity is capable of." The room fell silent as Monroe considered his request. Leading this kind of campaign would require someone with vision, courage, and an unshakable belief in victory when all signs pointed to defeat. Hayes certainly fit the bill, but he wasn't without his critics. Many in the government saw him as reckless, too eager to throw lives away for the sake of a gamble. Yet, Monroe couldn't deny that his plan had merit. If anyone could pull off a miracle, it might be him. "Very well," she said at last, nodding. "Slowly, you'll have your command. But understand this, General, failure isn't an option. Not for humanity." Hayes straightened, a flicker of determination crossing his face. "Understood, Madam President. We won't let you down." As Hayes left the Oval Office, the enormity of the task ahead settled over him like a heavy cloak. Mobilizing Earth's forces wouldn't be easy. Resources were stretched thin, and morale among the population was fragile at best. Rumors of the Zarnak's atrocities had spread quickly, sowing fear and panic. Entire cities had been evacuated in preparation for an attack that might never come more, might arrive tomorrow. The uncertainty was almost worse than the threat itself. But Hayes wasn't one to dwell on impossibilities. He had a job to do, and he intended to do it. His first stop was the headquarters of the Human Federation's military division, a sprawling complex located just outside Washington, D.C. Inside, officers bustled about, coordinating logistics and analyzing intelligence reports. Hayes made his way to the war room, where a large holographic map of the galaxy dominated the center of the room. Red markers indicated Zarnak-controlled territories, while blue ones represented human-held systems. The disparity was stark. "General," greeted Colonel Rachel Meyer, a wiry woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. She saluted crisply before gesturing toward the map. "This is the situation as of 20 minutes ago. As you can see, the Zarnak are closing in on several key systems. If they secure those, they'll have a clear path to Earth." Hayes nodded, studying the map closely. "What about our fleet? How many ships do we have ready for deployment?" Meyer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the answer. "Approximately 50 vessels, sir. Most are outdated models, retrofitted with whatever upgrades we could manage. We've also called up reserve units, but, well, let's just say they're not exactly battle-ready." Hayes clenched his jaw, but forced himself to remain calm. 50 ships against the Zarnak's thousands. It was laughable, really. But numbers weren't everything. Strategy mattered, adaptability mattered, and humanity had something the Zarnak lacked. "Creativity. We'll make do," Hayes said firmly. "Start drafting volunteers. Anyone willing to fight, regardless of experience level. We'll train them as we go." Meyer blinked in surprise. "Sir, are you sure about that? Putting untrained civilians into combat situations is risky." "Yes," Hayes interrupted, "but we don't have the luxury of being picky. Besides, sometimes raw talent outweighs years of training. Look at history. David versus Goliath. The underdog wins because they refuse to give up." Meyer nodded reluctantly, jotting down notes on her datapad. "Understood, sir. I'll get started immediately." As Meyer moved to carry out his orders, Hayes turned his attention to another critical piece of the puzzle: weapons. Traditional armaments wouldn't cut it against the Zarnak's advanced technology. They needed something new, something unexpected, something that could level the playing field. That's when he remembered Dr. Emily Ross. Dr. Ross was a physicist, working on experimental quantum weaponry at a top-secret research facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert. Her project, codenamed Eclipse, had been shrouded in secrecy for years, dismissed by many as impractical or outright impossible. But Hayes had read the reports. If Eclipse worked even partially, it could change the course of the war. He wasted no time arranging a visit to the facility. The journey took him across the country, through barren landscapes and desolate highways. When he arrived, he was met by a team of scientists, led by Ross herself. She was younger than he expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with curly auburn hair tied back in a ponytail and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Despite her youthful appearance, there was a quiet confidence about her that commanded respect. "General Hayes." She greeted him, shaking his hand firmly. "I assume you're here about Eclipse." "You assume correctly," Hayes replied. "How close are you to completing it?" Ross hesitated, glancing at her colleagues, before answering. "Close, but not close enough. The weapon requires immense amounts of energy to function, and stabilizing the quantum field has proven challenging. There's also the risk of catastrophic failure if something goes wrong." Hayes crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Let me rephrase my question. Can you make it work in time to help us fight the Zarnak?" Ross met his gaze, her resolve hardening. If I have the resources and the authorization, I can try, but I can't guarantee success. That's all I need, Hayes said simply. Do whatever it takes. Humanity's future depends on it. Over the next few weeks, Hayes threw himself into preparing Earth's defenses. Ships were retrofitted with cutting-edge tech scavenged from abandoned alien vessels. Pilots underwent intense training simulations, learning to fly in formations, designed to maximize agility and unpredictability. Civilians volunteered by the thousands, inspired by speeches delivered by Hayes and other leaders. Among them were Riley Bennett, a fearless young woman with a natural talent for flying, and Marcus Kane, a former engineer who had lost his family to the Zarnax attacks. Both would become integral parts of the effort. Meanwhile, Dr. Ross and her team worked tirelessly on Eclipse, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. Progress was slow, fraught with setbacks and near disasters, but slowly, steadily, they began to make headway. The weapon was far from perfect, but it was coming together as the pieces fell into place. Hayes allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The road ahead was fraught with peril, and the odds were still stacked heavily against them. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to prove that even the smallest light could shine brightly in the darkest of times. Part 3. The Human Federation's war effort was beginning to take shape, but it wasn't without its challenges. General Caleb Hayes had spent weeks rallying volunteers, retrofitting ships, and preparing strategies that could give humanity a fighting chance against the Zarnak Dominion. Yet, as he stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense platform, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. The Zarnak were relentless, their advance methodical and unstoppable. Every day they grew closer to Earth, and every delay increased the risk of catastrophe. Dr. Emily Ross's work on Eclipse was progressing, but not quickly enough for Hayes's liking. He visited her facility regularly, pressing her for updates and offering whatever resources she needed. On one such visit, he found her pacing furiously in front of a massive bank of monitors, her face pale with frustration. "General," she said as he entered, her voice tight with stress, "we've hit another snag. The quantum field generator is overheating during tests. If we can't stabilize it, the weapon will be useless or worse, dangerous." Hayes frowned, stepping closer to examine the screens filled with complex equations and fluctuating graphs. He didn't understand most of it, but he trusted Ross's expertise. "How bad is it?" he asked bluntly. Ross sighed, running a hand through her curly hair. "Bad enough. We're pushing the limits of what's physically possible here. The energy required to power Eclipse is immense, and containing it safely is proving problematic. One wrong move, and we could vaporize half the facility." Hayes clenched his jaw. Vaporizing the facility and everyone inside it wasn't an option, but neither was waiting indefinitely for perfection. They needed results now. Is there any way to speed things up, even if it means cutting corners? Ross hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. Cutting corners increases the risk exponentially. But, she trailed off, glancing at the screens again, if we focus all our efforts on a single prototype and limit its range, we might be able to get something operational within weeks instead of months. It won't be perfect, but it could buy us some time. "Do it," Hayes said without hesitation. "Time is exactly what we don't have." As Ross nodded and turned back to her team, Hayes left the facility with a heavy heart. He hated gambling with people's lives, but war forced hard choices. If Eclipse worked even imperfectly, it could turn the tide, and if it failed, well, humanity would find another way to fight. Back at the orbital defense platform, Hayes met with Captain Liam Carter, who had returned from the outer colonies after narrowly escaping a Zarnak ambush. Carter looked weary, his uniform rumpled, and his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Despite his condition, He carried himself with quiet dignity. A man burdened by loss, but unwilling to surrender. Captain Hayes greeted him, extending a hand. "Welcome back." Carter shook it firmly, though his grip lacked its usual strength. "Thank you, General. I wish I had better news to report." "I heard about Delta Sector," Hayes replied, his tone sympathetic. "You did everything you could. No one expects miracles out there." Carter nodded, though his expression remained grim. "It's not just Delta Sector. The Zarnok are everywhere. Their fleet is too big, too fast. We're barely holding them off as it is." "I know," Hayes said, his voice low. "That's why we're changing the game. Tell me, how much do you know about guerrilla tactics?" Carter raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his fatigue. "Enough to get the idea. Why?" Hayes gestured for Carter to follow him to a nearby holotable, where a map of the galaxy shimmered faintly. Red dots marked Zarna-controlled systems, while blue ones represented human-held territories. Between them lay vast stretches of neutral space, dotted with supply depots, communication hubs, and lightly defended outposts. "We can't beat the Zarnok head-on," Hayes explained, pointing to various locations on the map. "But we can hit them where it hurts their logistics. Supply lines, resource depots, anything that keeps their war machine running. Small strikes, quick hits. Make them bleed slowly until they weaken." Carter studied the map thoughtfully, his mind turning over the possibilities. "It's risky. They'll retaliate hard once they realize what we're doing." "They already are retaliating," Hayes countered. "This way, we control the terms of engagement. Keep them guessing, keep them spread thin. It's the only way we stand a chance." Carter nodded slowly, seeing the logic in Hayes's plan. "What do you need from me?" "You'll lead one of the strike teams," Hayes said, meeting Carter's gaze. "Your experience makes you invaluable. Plus, your crew on the Odyssey has proven they can handle themselves under pressure." Carter straightened slightly, a flicker of pride breaking through his weariness. "We'll do our part, General. Just tell us where to hit first." Hayes smiled faintly. "Leave that to me. For now, rest up. You've earned it." While Carter prepared his crew for their new mission, Hayes turned his attention to assembling the rest of the strike force. Volunteers poured in from across Earth, many driven by personal loss or a desire to protect their families. Among them were Riley, Bennett, and Marcus Kane, two individuals whose determination caught Hayes's eye almost immediately. Riley was a natural pilot, fearless and instinctive in the cockpit. She had grown up dreaming of exploring the stars, never imagining she'd end up fighting for humanity's survival. Her small frame and unassuming demeanor belied her skill, but anyone who watched her fly knew she was extraordinary. During training exercises, she consistently outmaneuvered more experienced pilots, earning both respect and admiration from her peers. Marcus, on the other hand, was a thinker, a former engineer who had lost his wife and daughter when the Zarnok attacked their colony. He channeled his grief into innovation. He spent hours tinkering with ship systems, finding ways to improve performance and efficiency. His modifications gave older vessels a new lease on life, making them faster and more resilient. When Hayes saw Marcus's work firsthand, he knew he had found someone special. Together, Riley and Marcus became key members of the strike force, working alongside Carter and others to prepare for their first mission. The fleet was far from impressive patchwork ships held together by sheer willpower, but each vessel brimmed with hope. These weren't soldiers fighting for glory. They were ordinary people united by a common cause. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters all, willing to risk everything for a future worth living. As the days passed, Hayes finalized the details of their initial operation, a coordinated assault on a Zarnak supply convoy traveling through a remote sector of space. Intelligence suggested the convoy carried vital materials needed for the construction of new dreadnoughts. Destroying it wouldn't cripple the Zarnok completely, but it would send a message. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. On the eve of the mission, Hayes gathered the strike force aboard the orbital defense platform for a final briefing. The room buzzed with nervous energy as pilots, engineers, and crew members filed in. Taking their seats around a large holotable, Hayes stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding immediate silence. "Tomorrow," he began, his voice steady and clear, "we launch our first offensive against the Zarnok. This isn't just a battle, it's a statement. We're showing them that humanity isn't afraid, that we won't roll over and die. Each of you has volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. Some of you may not come back, but if we succeed, we'll strike a blow that echoes across the galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Our target is a supply convoy carrying critical resources. Take it out, and we disrupt their plans. Hit-and-run tactics will be our bread and butter. Speed, stealth, precision. Don't linger. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is to cripple, not conquer." Hayes pointed to specific points on the holomap, outlining attack vectors and fallback positions. "Captain Carter will lead the main assault. Riley, you'll provide cover fire and draw enemy reinforcements away from the convoy. Marcus, your job is to ensure our ships stay operational. If something breaks, fix it fast. Everyone else, stick to your roles and trust your teammates. Together, we'll make history." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement and determination. Hayes dismissed them shortly afterward, allowing the crews to prepare for departure. As the crowd dispersed, he pulled Carter aside for a private word. "Liam," he said quietly, "this mission is crucial. If we pull it off, it'll boost morale and show the Zarnok we mean business. But if we fail, we won't fail." Carter interrupted, his tone resolute. "I'll make sure of it." Hayes nodded, placing a hand on Carter's shoulder. "Good, because the galaxy is counting on us." When dawn broke over Earth, the fleet departed in waves, slipping silently into the void. Their destination lay light years away, deep in enemy territory. The journey would take days, giving everyone ample time to reflect on what awaited them. For some, fear gnawed at their resolve. For others, anger fueled their courage. But for all of them, one truth remained undeniable. Humanity's fate rested in their hands, and they refused to let it slip away. Part 4. The strike force moved through the void of space like shadows, their ships cloaked in silence as they approached the designated sector. The mission was clear: destroy the Zarnok supply convoy and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. It was a simple plan on paper, but executing it would require precision, timing, and a bit of luck. For now, everything depended on staying undetected. Captain Liam Carter sat in the command chair of the Odyssey, his eyes scanning the view screen ahead. The ship's sensors were running at minimal power to avoid detection, leaving the crew blind to anything outside visual range. Tension hung thick in the air, a quiet hum of anticipation that made every sound seem louder than it was. Carter glanced at Lieutenant Harper, who stood nearby, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Status?" he asked softly. "All systems." "Nominal," Harper replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "No signs of Zarnak activity yet. We're still about an hour out from the convoy's projected location." Carter nodded, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Good. Keep us on this course until we get closer. Then we'll drop the cloak and strike fast." Harper acknowledged with a curt nod, her focus unwavering. She knew what was at stake. If they were spotted too early, the entire mission could unravel. But if they succeeded, it would be humanity's first real victory against the Zarnok. That thought alone kept her hands steady, despite the nerves gnawing at her stomach. Meanwhile, aboard her sleek fighter craft, Riley Bennett ran through pre-flight checks for what felt like the 100th time. Her small vessel, nicknamed Sparrow, was one of the fastest in the fleet. designed for speed and agility rather than raw firepower. Riley trusted it completely, knowing its quirks and strengths better than anyone else. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her as she prepared for combat. "You ready, Sparrow?" came Marcus Kane's voice over the comms. He was stationed aboard a support ship nearby, overseeing last-minute repairs and modifications. His calm demeanor always had a way of steadying her nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be," Riley replied, forcing a smile she hoped came across in her tone. "Just keep my bird flying, okay?" "Always," Marcus said firmly. "You do your part, and I'll do mine." Riley appreciated the reassurance. Marcus had become something of a rock for her during the short time they'd worked together. His practical approach to problems balanced out her sometimes reckless instincts, creating a partnership that worked surprisingly well. As she powered up the engines, she reminded herself of why she was here. This wasn't just about proving herself, it was about making sure no one else suffered the way so many already had. Back aboard the Odyssey, Carter called for a final briefing with his senior officers. The group gathered in the war room, where holographic displays showed the convoy's expected route and surrounding sectors. Red markers indicated potential threats, enemy patrols, sensor arrays, and other obstacles that could derail their plans. "We've got one shot at this," Carter began, his tone serious. "Once we engage, there's no turning back. Our primary objective is to disable or destroy the convoy. Secondary objectives include drawing enemy reinforcements away from the area. Riley, you'll handle that part. Use your speed to lure them off course while we hit the convoy hard." Riley nodded, her expression focused. "Understood, Captain. I'll make sure they follow me." "Good," Carter continued. "Marcus, your team needs to stay on standby. If any of our ships take damage, you patch them up fast. We can't afford to lose anyone out there." Marcus gave a quick salute. "You got it, sir." With the plan laid out, the crew dispersed to their stations, leaving Carter alone in the war room. He stared at the hologram for a moment longer, his mind racing through every possible scenario. What if the convoy changed course? What if enemy reinforcements arrived sooner than expected? There were too many variables to account for, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on him. But he pushed those thoughts aside. Overthinking wouldn't help. All he could do was trust his team and hope for the best. An hour later, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the convoy's location, through the Odyssey's view screen. Carter could see the massive cargo ships lumbering through space, escorted by a handful of smaller patrol vessels. They weren't heavily guarded, which suggested the Zarnok didn't expect trouble. That arrogance would work in humanity's favor. "Cloak is down," Harper announced. "We're live. Engage," Carter ordered, his voice firm. The strike force sprang into action. The Odyssey unleashed a barrage of missiles, targeting the largest cargo ships first. Explosions lit up the darkness as hulls ruptured and debris scattered in all directions. Simultaneously, Riley's Sparrow darted past the chaos, firing warning shots at the escort vessels. Her movements were erratic, unpredictable, forcing the Zarnok pilots to chase her instead of defending the convoy. "They're taking the bait," Riley shouted over the comms, her voice tinged with excitement. "I'm leading them away now. Stay sharp," Carter warned. "Don't let them corner you." "I won't," Riley assured him, banking sharply to avoid incoming fire. Behind her, the enemy ships followed, their larger frames unable to match her agility. She grinned, despite the danger, relishing the thrill of the chase. This was what she lived for, not the destruction itself, but the challenge of outsmarting an opponent who thought themselves superior. Back at the convoy, the Odyssey's crew worked tirelessly to maximize their impact. Torpedoes and energy blasts tore through the remaining cargo ships, reducing them to smoldering wrecks. The Zarnok escorts that stayed behind attempted to retaliate, but the human ships were faster and more maneuverable. Each attack was precise, calculated to inflict maximum damage without lingering long enough to be targeted. Convoy neutralized, Harper reported, her voice triumphant. All major targets destroyed. Excellent work, Carter said, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Now, let's regroup and get out of here. But the mission wasn't over yet. Riley continued to lead her pursuers on a wild goose chase, weaving between asteroids and stray debris to stay one step ahead. Her heart pounded as she dodged plasma bolts and narrowly avoided collisions, her reflexes razor sharp. Finally, she spotted an opening, a narrow gap between two large rocks that the larger Zarnok ships couldn't navigate. "Here goes nothing," she muttered, pushing the throttle to maximum. The Sparrow shot forward, slipping through the gap with inches to spare. Behind her, the pursuing vessels collided with each other, their bulk too cumbersome to follow. A cheer erupted from Riley's lips as she pulled away, her escape complete by the time she rejoined the fleet. The Odyssey and its companions were already retreating into hyperspace, their job done. Riley docked her fighter and headed straight for the bridge, where Carter greeted her with a rare smile. "Well flown, Lieutenant," he said, extending a hand. "You saved us back there." Riley shook his hand, grinning broadly. "Just doing my part, Captain." As the fleet disappeared into the safety of hyperspace, the crew allowed themselves a moment of celebration. For the first time in months, they had struck a blow against the Zarnak and lived to tell the tale. News of their success spread quickly back to Earth, igniting a spark of hope among the population. Reports flooded the media, showing images of burning Zarnak ships and praising the bravery of the strike force. President Grace Monroe addressed the nation from the Oval Office, her voice filled with pride and determination. "Today, humanity proved that we are not helpless, we are not victims, we are fighters, and we will not stop until the Zarnak threat is eliminated." The victory, though small, had a profound effect on morale. Volunteers poured in from every corner of the globe, eager to join the fight. Factories ramped up production of weapons and supplies, while scientists redoubled their efforts to develop new technologies. Even Dr. Emily Ross, inspired by the success of the mission, pushed harder than ever to complete Eclipse. General Caleb Hayes watched the public reaction with cautious optimism. One win didn't mean the war was won, but it was a start. The Zarnak wouldn't take this lightly. They would respond with fury, determined to crush humanity once and for all. But Hayes knew something the Zarnak didn't. Humanity wasn't afraid anymore. They had tasted victory, however fleeting, and it had awakened something deep within them. Defeat was no longer certain. Not while humans still had breath in their lungs and fire in their hearts. Part 5. The victory at the Zarnak supply convoy sent ripples across the galaxy. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, humanity could stand against the seemingly unstoppable Zarnak dominion. News of the strike spread like wildfire, not only on Earth, but among the remnants of other civilizations who had suffered under Zarnak rule. Refugees and survivors began reaching out to the Human Federation, offering support, intelligence, and even old ships salvaged from the ruins of their fleets. It was as if the tide, however slightly, had begun to turn. But amidst the celebrations and growing optimism, cracks were starting to form within humanity's fragile alliance. Not everyone shared General Caleb Hayes' vision or his methods. Senator Paul Kramer, a prominent figure in the Federation Council, had long been skeptical of Hayes' leadership. Kramer was a tall, thin man with sharp features and cold gray eyes, known for his cautious approach to governance. He believed in playing it safe, avoiding unnecessary risks, and prioritizing stability over bold action. To him, Hayes' guerrilla tactics were reckless and dangerous, putting too many lives on the line for uncertain gains. Kramer stood in his office in the Federation capital, staring out at the sprawling city below. His desk was cluttered with reports and datapads, each one detailing the costs of the war effort. Financial strain, resource shortages, and mounting casualties painted a grim picture. The public might cheer for heroes like Captain Liam Carter and Riley Bennett, but Kramer knew better than to trust fleeting emotions. Wars weren't won by cheers, they were won by careful planning and measured decisions. Senator came, a voice from behind him. It was Victor Sloan, a corporate lobbyist representing several major defense contractors. Sloan was a smooth-talking man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit tailored to perfection. He had been pushing for increased funding, 2 private companies developing military technology, arguing that privatization was the key to victory. Victor, Kramer greeted him without turning around. "What do you want?" Sloan stepped closer, placing a datapad on Kramer's desk. "I thought you'd be interested in this. It's classified information about Dr. Emily Ross's Eclipse project." Kramer frowned, picking up the datapad and scrolling through its contents. Blueprints, schematics, and detailed notes outlined the weapon's capabilities and its weaknesses. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply. "That's not important," Sloan replied smoothly. "What matters is what we do with it. Imagine the potential profits if Eclipse falls into private hands. We could revolutionize warfare not just against the Zarnok, but beyond. Humanity would dominate the galaxy." Kramer hesitated, torn between duty and ambition. Leaking classified information was treasonous, but Sloan's words struck a chord. If Eclipse succeeded, it would cement Hayes's reputation as a hero, overshadowing anyone who opposed him, including Kramer. On the other hand, exposing the project's flaws could undermine Hayes's authority and shift power back to those who favored caution over recklessness. "I'll think about it," Kramer said finally. Setting the datapad aside, Sloan smiled knowingly. "Take your time, Senator. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often." As Sloan left the office, Kramer sat down heavily in his chair, his mind racing. He didn't trust Sloan, but the man had a point. Hayes is aggressive. Strategies were risky, and Eclipse was no exception. What if it failed spectacularly? What if it caused more harm than good? The thought gnawed at him, planting seeds of doubt that grew stronger with each passing hour. Meanwhile, aboard the Odyssey, Captain Liam Carter and his crew prepared for their next mission. The success of the convoy raid had boosted morale, but they knew better than to rest on their laurels. The Zarnak wouldn't tolerate such defiance lightly, and retaliation was inevitable. Intelligence reports suggested that Varnak, the ruthless Zarnak commander leading the invasion, was furious about the loss of the convoy. He had already dispatched additional patrols to hunt down the human fleet, vowing to crush them once and for all. "We've got incoming transmissions," Lieutenant Harper announced, her voice tense. "Looks like the Zarnak are broadcasting threats across the sector." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess they're calling us cowards for using hit-and-run tactics." "Pretty much," Harper confirmed. "They're saying we lack honor and challenging us to face them directly." Carter snorted. "Honor doesn't win wars. Tell communications to ignore it. We stick to our plan." Harper nodded, relaying the order. Despite his outward confidence, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Zarnok were arrogant, yes, but they weren't stupid. Broadcasting threats so openly felt like a distraction, a way to draw attention away from something else. He made a mental note to stay vigilant. Back on Earth, Hayes received troubling news. A whistleblower within the Federation Council had leaked details about Eclipse to the press. Overnight, headlines exploded with speculation about the weapon's development, its potential risks, and whether it was worth the investment. Public opinion, which had been overwhelmingly supportive of the war effort, began to fracture. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, demanding transparency and accountability. President Grace Monroe called an emergency meeting with Hayes and other top officials. The tension in the room was palpable as Monroe addressed the group. "This leak jeopardizes everything we've worked for," she said, her voice firm but tinged with frustration. "If the Zarnok learn about Eclipse before it's ready, they'll target the facility. And if the public loses faith in our leadership, we'll lose the support we need to keep fighting." Hayes clenched his fists beneath the table, his jaw tight. "We can't afford distractions like this. Whoever leaked the information needs to be found and dealt with." Monroe nodded grimly. "Agreed. Start an investigation immediately. In the meantime, accelerate work on Eclipse. We need it operational as soon as possible." Unbeknownst to Hayes, the damage was already done. The Zarnok intercepted fragments of the leaked data, piecing together enough information to identify the location of the Eclipse facility. Varnock saw an opportunity to strike a crippling blow against humanity, targeting the heart of their resistance. He ordered his fleet to mobilize, directing them toward the remote outpost housing the project. At the facility, Dr. Emily Ross and her team worked around the clock, unaware of the danger closing in. Progress on Eclipse had reached a critical stage, with the prototype nearing completion. Ross was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, betraying weeks of sleepless nights, but she refused to slow down. Every test, every adjustment, brought them closer to success. "We're almost there," she told her assistant, a young engineer named Alex Chen. "Just a few more calibrations, and we'll be ready for a live test." Alex nodded, though his expression remained uneasy. "Dr. Ross, have you seen the news? People are questioning whether this is even worth it. Some are saying it's too dangerous." Ross sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, but we don't have a choice. If Eclipse works, it could save billions of lives. That's worth any risk." Before Alex could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as automated systems detected incoming ships. Ross froze, her heart pounding. "What's happening?" "It's the Zarnok," someone shouted from the control room. "They've found us." Panic erupted as personnel scrambled to secure the facility. Ross grabbed a tablet containing the latest data on Eclipse, knowing it was their only chance to protect the project if the worst happened. Outside, the horizon lit up with streaks of plasma fire as Zarnak cruisers descended upon the outpost. "Everyone evacuate," Ross yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get to the escape pods." But fleeing wasn't an option for her. She had spent months building Eclipse, pouring her soul into its creation. She couldn't abandon it now. Clutching the tablet tightly, she ran toward the prototype chamber, determined to activate the weapon even if it killed her in the process. Above the facility, the Zarnok fleet unleashed a devastating bombardment. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and the ground shook violently. Inside the prototype chamber, Ross input the final commands, sweat dripping down her face. The quantum field generator hummed ominously, its energy levels spiking dangerously high. "This is it?" she whispered, bracing herself. "Please, work." As the Zarnok forces breached the facility, a blinding pulse of energy erupted from the chamber, engulfing everything in its path. The shockwave rippled outward, crippling the attacking fleet and leaving the outpost in ruins. When the dust settled, silence reigned. The Zarnok retreated, their forces decimated. Back on Earth, Hayes received confirmation of the attack and the partial success of Eclipse. Though the facility was destroyed, the prototype had proven its potential. Humanity had struck another blow against the Zarnok, but at a terrible cost. Hayes stared at the report, his expression unreadable. Sacrifices had been made, lives lost. Yet, despite the tragedy, one truth remained undeniable. Humanity had rewritten the rules of the game once again, and the Zarnok were beginning to realize they weren't dealing with ordinary opponents. Defeat was still far from certain.